The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's program, we explore an important topic in rural communities, depression and isolation. We begin with Joanne Lauer, a great storyteller who has some heartfelt reflections on rural life. Then we talk with Dan Stedman, writer and director for movie Belleville, which uses humor to examine this serious topic. And finally, Ted Matthews provides some practical advice on the topic. I hope you'll stay with us. Farm Connections is next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
We're so fortunate to have Joanne with us to tell stories. Storytelling is an art, and she has a real passion and talent for it. She expands on what her childhood was and her memories and brings us into that wonderful, wonderful, warm feeling of what it was like. With me today, Joanne. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you, Dan. So nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you. And I've heard some of your stories, and I was wondering if you've got some that you can share today.
I thought maybe I would share with you just a short one called Dad's Bee.
Please do.
I'm searching for a tractor. Meadow green with sunrise yellow letters that proudly say John Deere. But Dad just called it the Bee. Now, this tractor never worked on Sundays. If it should be that we don't have a Monday, Dad would say, then why do we work on Sunday? So the Bee rested like we did. A clutch, a lever, an electric start, and space on the platform to stand, but only if your name was Jimmy or Donnie or maybe Joanne. Petals like flowers cut from the steel seat, topped with a yellow umbrella. That tractor stopped in the field on hot summer days as Mom and Jimmy and Donnie and I brought lunch to Dad in the field. Drive the truck to the field's edge, walk the furrowed earth in bare feet. So happy to see us, he'd hug us, each one. Dad, I'd wonder out loud, don't you get lonely out plowing all day? Just you and the bee in the sun? That tractor fed us all during our growing years. It fed many others too. You will recognize it from my description. I'm sure you will. Sold. The auctioneers cried out that horrible word, sold. All those memories to the highest bidder. And the tractor was driven away without my knowing. I was too busy wrapped around the fence watching my sheep being sold. Our neighbor bought them for a song, I overheard him say. They're not worth much anyway, just scrubs. I so wanted to scream, and in silence I did. No, please, they're my sheep. Please love them. But I knew he never would. And then it was over. All the machinery and animals gone. Dad, with his arm around Mom, stepped back into the house for the very last time. And we Ostranders drove away from that place that for so long we had called home. but you never really leave your farm. Your soul stays rooted right there with things, just little things that really matter. Things like haymows with pigeons and batches of kittens and horse hides made into blankets. But we did drive away from a time. We drove away from that time when neighbors were friends, when doors had no locks, and when the Holsteins all had names. As for the tractor, it could be in pieces behind someone's old barn, but I would like to think it's standing tall and proud as before. Maybe it's not so green, maybe the letters aren't so yellow, but it knows that I'm looking for it. You see, it's not just a tractor I'm searching for. It's Dad's bee.
Wow, wonderful story, thank you. Can you expand on this story a little bit? Why were you leaving the farm?
We didn't own the farm. My mom always said, you never buy anything you can't pay cash money for. So she didn't allow Dad to buy a farm, which was sad because he really wanted to do that. So at some point, he decided they needed to move off the farm after we had been there for about 20 years. And I had already left home, but I was there for the auction.
Where was the farm located?
4 miles south of Thompson, Iowa.
Did you ever drive by?
Oh yes, I go there.
Are some of the memories still there?
They definitely are, Dan. The barn is gone, and that's sad. But our landlord's son now owns it. He would not sell it to me. I tried to buy just 5 acres in the house, and he would not do that. But he did let me go through the house one day. And what seemed like used to be this huge house is this tiny, kind of like a little dollhouse kind of farmhouse. It's really cute. So yes, I go there a couple times a year. I drive up the driveway, even if they're not there.
So your perspective changed, but it still has good memories.
Definitely.
And the auction seemed like a turning point in your life, or what happened?
Yes, my parents moved to Clear Lake, where they began working at, it was called Handicap Village at the time. It's now Opportunity Village, and they were the very first house parents in the first cottage. So they changed completely from farming to working with kids.
So they shared their talents from the soil and farming in a different way?
They did.
Did they teach gardening or other skills?
My mother taught cooking because she was the cook. My dad was in charge of the 8 young men who lived in this cottage, and then he became the maintenance man. So he was actually able to teach all about building things and painting things and putting things together and planting trees.
So they shared. They shared their talents, they shared their skills, much like their daughter is today. Wonderful story. Thanks for sharing. It's helped form who you are, and that's a good thing.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
It only took you 4 minutes to learn how to ride a bike, huh?
What a wondrous sensation.
Coming up next, Dan Stedman from the movie Belleville.
Just lost out there.
Yeah, like an extraterrestrial.
What?
Everyone is freaked out by you and your little house pet, Willie.
That's not true. You should have seen him at the concert. Everybody likes him.
Yeah, well, they won't when I'm done with them. And tell them all about you and your little special-powered weirdo.
Like they're gonna believe he's an extraterrestrial or alien or whatever. Just tell me where he went.
I don't know. I didn't open the door.
Come on.
The issue of depression is not always openly discussed, especially in rural communities. Recently, the movie Belleville tackled this topic, and joining us on Farm Connections today is Dan Stedman, director of Belleville. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Tell us how you connected with Ted Trent and how the two of you developed the concept of this movie.
Ted and I had made another film together, and he asked me to write a film that would be set back in his hometown of Belleville, Illinois. And he sent me back here because I'd never been to Belleville, even though I grew up in Michigan and I lived in northern Illinois for a while. But I fell in love with the community, and I really wanted to tell a rural story about a farmer, and we actually shot on Ted's father's property, and so that's how that came to be.
How is rural depression reflected in the film?
I think as far as rural depression, that would be no different than any other kind of urban or big city depression, except for the fact that I really liked the idea of a farmer in this place because it's the ideal job where you can pull away from society. I think Willie has a good excuse not to engage with people around him because he really can become an island unto himself out there on the farm. And so the idea of somebody being depressed on their property and not really having a reason to engage with the public all that much was appealing to me.
Why does the farmer in this movie isolate himself?
Willie in this movie finds himself isolated because he lost his wife Jana at a very young age. It was a tragic accident that happened on their property. He had nothing to do with it, but as is often the case, he blames himself. That's enough for him to sort of board up his bedroom, keep anyone from going in there. He sort of created a shrine to his wife. And Willie is really becomes isolated because of the pain he suffered. The community tries to reach out to him, as often small town communities do, but he refuses to accept their help. And that's where we find Willie at the top of this movie.
What causes him to eventually find hope?
Willie eventually finds hope through a friendship with Neela, our character from a world far, far away. He shows up on his property, he shows up in a swamp behind his property, and just takes up residency there. Of course, Willie, being somebody who doesn't want anyone's help, is resistant at first, but a friendship begins to grow. And we see this friendship between two men, which is not often something you see on film, and it interested me a lot. And beyond that, Neela's character starts to open Willie's heart up to his community around him. And hopefully that's the journey we see Willie take in this film.
What do you hope the audience will understand from this story, especially as it relates to isolation in rural communities?
I hope audiences take from this film the message that life is better when shared with others. When you can open your heart to others and let them in, it not only benefits you, but it benefits others. You know, we're all given something in this world to contribute. And when we isolate ourselves, we don't allow ourselves to be there for others.
Right.
Sometimes we think of it selfishly and think, well, I don't need anybody else. But do we ask the question, do others need me? And I think that that's what I wanted to address with this film, is that we need each other. And well, grief involves different stages, and depression and the challenges of life, we go through different stages. It's important to see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that can be found by letting others in and trusting again.
Since aliens don't really drop into our lives, what analogies should audiences draw when it comes to either bringing up the topic with someone you suspect is suffering from depression, or seek help if you have depression?
Well, yes, we don't often get visitors from another world that we know of in our lives, but I don't really see Neela necessarily as an alien. I never say as a screenwriter what he actually is or where he's actually from. It's important for me to just play him as an outsider, a very human outsider who doesn't understand this world.
Tell me how the movie has been received by the public.
I'm thrilled with the way the movie's been received by the public. I have never written a movie that's such a broad audience, from teenagers to senior citizens. It's a broad audience because I think thematically the movie touches on subjects that everyone from that age range, that 60 or 70 year age span, understands. And I also think that there's enough humor and comedy and lightheartedness to the film as well, that there's a little something in it for everyone. So I've been thrilled by the public's reaction, especially by our supporters here in the Midwest, who I think appreciate a story being told in our neck of the woods.
What were you trying to tell the public or the audience through your movie in regards to mental health and depression?
I want audiences to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes that light is seeking professional help and getting proper medication and not being ashamed of that. And just as we wouldn't be ashamed of getting what we need for physical ailments, our mental health is so important. It's been talked about in the public so much lately. And I think because of the shame attached with mental health issues, people isolate and they don't talk about it because they're embarrassed. And I wanted to send that message that, that there are others out there. You know, Willie might just be like you, even though the circumstances may be different.
Dan Stedman, Director of Belleville, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today, for asking such great detailed questions, and for talking about a subject matter that means a lot to me, and I hope it means a lot to viewers who will eventually see this film. Check out BellevilleTheMovie.com for more information.
Stay tuned for more Farm Connections. Ted Matthews is the Director of Rural Mental Health for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. He works with groups and individuals to help address mental health issues that may be affecting their personal well-being, as well as the operation of their business. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you.
Well, tell us about your work.
Well, I work exclusively with farm families and farm individuals on various mental health topics.
Well, you've been doing that for some time now. How long?
1993 was about when we started. 97 is when it became full-fledged, and I've pretty much been doing that ever since then.
Well, it is a long time, but that gives you a lot of experience and a lot of case studies.
Yes, and it has truly been a joy to work with farms and farm families.
Well, what are some issues that you deal with in rural mental health?
Big ones now are, there's a lot more divorce now. There's a lot more difficulties in marriages on farms than there used to be. A big part of that is women working off the farm. The stress of farming is high, and a lot of people that aren't in farming, they sort of assume that the stress, why would you feel stress if you're making money? And for a decade they did make a lot of money, or at least the corn and soybean growers did. The higher the land prices go, it doesn't matter to the farmer how much that land is worth, because they're farming it. You know, they have to pay more taxes as the prices go up. So for them, it's higher expenses, higher expenses, higher expenses, and you know, now what's coming is a crisis, and I think most people see that coming, and I'm quite concerned, and so is just about everyone in agriculture, about what's going to happen with that.
Higher prices for inputs and much lower prices for the sale of the commodity.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, certainly a problem, and maybe getting worse. Ted, can you tell me the difference really between mental health and mental illness?
Okay. Mental health is a way of growing to be healthier, happier. Mental illness is a diagnosis that says there is something wrong with your mental state, and whether it's through medications or being in group homes or whatever it is that needs to be done, you work with those. Mental health is a way of people feeling better, and it's such an important part of our life all the time. When we hear mental health, far too many people think mental illness. Mm-hmm. And mental health is something that I'm doing for myself or for my family to feel better than I did before. And so it should be seen as a good thing, as a healthy thing, as a move towards something better than where I was. And unfortunately, because of that stigma of the concept of mental illness, we see it as, what's wrong with me? Why are you calling me sick? Why are you labeling me this way, and so on, when mental health doesn't mean any of those things.
Depression classified as a mental illness?
Depression, there are so many different forms of depression, and that's actually a really good topic, because when people think and talk about depression, they immediately think about their own or someone that they know. And depression can go anywhere from, severe enough for suicide to I'm having a bad day, my hair doesn't look good, and I'm going to have a hard time going to school. And are both depression? Absolutely. So one of the problems with depression is it's such a broad term that when we talk about it, everybody assumes they understand it and they get depression, when there are some, as I said, there are some people that are so depressed that they commit suicide, or they do very violent things, or they go into a shell and they never come out.
Can't function.
All kinds of bad things can happen from depression. And when we look at it, we need to understand that when people are depressed, the key issue is always, what are we going to do? Not how did we get there, but how do we get out of there?
Once someone's identified with depression, or you think someone has depression or mental health issues, what are the next steps? If you have a friend or a family member that you think is challenged with mental illness, what should you do?
Well, first of all, in rural Minnesota, Iowa, wherever, you have doctors that deal with a lot more things. The general practitioners deal with a lot more things in rural areas than they do in urban areas, simply because they have to.
Sure.
So one of the things to do is talk to your local doctor. And seeing a psychologist for depression, seeing any kind of therapist for depression, that's obviously a good thing, but oftentimes it's not necessary. It's more the changing of behavior or an attitude. You don't need professional help for a lot of those things. I learned that actually with the floods in 1993 and 1996. I was working with mental health, and I, frankly, FEMA at that time didn't really know how to deal with those things because they had never used mental health. I mean, that was just a new thing with FEMA. And so we sort of had to do that on our own. And the assumption was, we had to have all of these psychologists working and seeing all these people as psychologists, and we found that very few psychologists were needed. Outreach workers were needed. And, frankly, a lot of, I do a lot of trainings, and one of the things I train is it's sort of like most FBM instructors have had at least one of my trainings, and that's sort of what I do. I make them outreach workers, whether they know it or not. Anyone that's listening might be thinking, really, he did that to me? And it's because they can pick up on a lot of things, and they know what to do. And of course, a lot of times what to do is they call me, but oftentimes they don't have to do that. They can go another avenue, and they will say, you need to get your physician, or I can see that there's something wrong. Maybe they can talk to them, because you don't always have to have this expert in order to do that. And as a matter of fact, I probably get 50 phone calls a week from people who have a 5 or 10 minute question. Sure. And that's one of the things that I really like about what I do also, is I don't have to see everyone for an hour a week for X amount of time. I can talk to somebody for 5 minutes and just help them, guide them in a direction or something.
Well, speaking of that, Ted, can you give the audience some ideas of resources if they've identified a need?
One obviously is to call me if it's a rural farm family and so on. Trust your hospitals and your doctors to be able to guide you to someone that is healthy. And I would also say, and this is sort of a warning, if you do get referred to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and you're not feeling comfortable with that person, look at it like you would look at almost anything else and say, well, then I'll go see somebody else. One of the problems that I've seen a lot is someone will see somebody that they weren't comfortable with and they assume that's how it goes, and so they don't see anyone else for another 30 years about this emotional issue, whatever it is. And that's truly sad, because you can be a great psychologist and not meet X person's needs because you just don't work well together. That doesn't make anybody bad, it doesn't make anybody wrong, it just means that you don't mesh, and if you don't mesh, you find somebody that you do mesh with.
Ted, really great information. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for being here. I'm Dan Hoffman, and I'll see you next time on Farm Connections.